Now, there we go. Can you see
You
it
get
now?
it?
Yes. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I was working on getting it up.
Okay.
Okay. So we've started each one of these with research, and the whole intent of this book is for principals, district leadership, and things like that, because we believe ever so strongly that a literacy initiative or increasing literacy outcomes should not be on the backs of teachers. In fact, I will tell you that I have never once seen a literacy initiative successful unless there's a strong principal at the helm. Today, we're going to be visiting with our guest is Jody Reese from Farmington, um, Davis, Utah, in Farmington, Utah. She's the principal at Sunset. And so she's going to talk about what she's done based on the principles found within It's Possible and what we're going to be talking about today. But here's another piece of research. I shared one yesterday or last week, and last week's was on the number of studies, how much stronger a good instructional leader is, a good principal is, than an intervention based on 757 studies. So having a strong principal is incredibly beneficial. So look at this one. Replacing a principal at the 25th percentile in effectiveness with one at the 75th percentile in effectiveness can increase annual student learning in reading and math by almost 3 months annually. That research is out of the Wallace Foundation. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do, because a lot of the work that we do, in fact, all of the work that we do at Schools Cubed and in the book, It's Possible, is based on three bodies of research. The first, of course, is the science of reading. The second is what highly effective leaders do, and that's outlined in the Wallace Foundation. And the third one is what highly effective schools do. So I find it fascinating. The typical student has an average growth of about 7 months every year. And somebody's going to ask me where that comes from, and I never remember, and then I have to go look it up. But the typical student grows by about 7 months in a year. If we add another 3 months onto that, because we have a highly effective principal, that's about almost another half of how much growth we can expect for that student. That's incredible. And here's the thing, we don't believe in dismantling or replacing a principal. We think a principal at the 25th percentile can easily become a principal at the 75th percentile. So, a principal, a leader matters. Go ahead, Angie. So today we're going to dig into what the key components of what we believe are the key components of assessment in order to ensure that it's possible that all students reach grade level. And they are benchmark assessments. And often benchmark assessments can also be referred to as an interim assessment, a universal screener. All of those are the same thing in our book. The next one is a diagnostic survey or screener. And then the third piece of information assessment that we rely on is progress monitoring. And you're going to find out that that's the thing that we rely on the most. And then a summative assessment. Typically, a summative assessment is either a unit assessment from your core reading programs or your state at the end of the year. We can get lots of information from that, although not enough to tell us exactly what's going on in reading. But all four of those assessments are critical in order to move the dial on literacy achievement. Okay, so when we're talking about assessments, and particularly for those schools going from a balanced literacy approach to a science of reading or a structured literacy approach, there are some practices that we suggest you move away from. And there are other practices that we suggest that you step into. The first one is running records. They're clunky. And I used to use running records all of the time. But unless a teacher has been highly trained, um, we suggest not using a running record, but instead use a benchmark assessment or a screening assessment. Of course, our favorites are Dibble's 8, Acadians, uh, Ames Web, things like that. The next one is observational assessments. When we lived in a balanced literacy world, many teachers took notes on how students were doing in reading to to understand their daily how they were doing on a daily basis. Well, we believe in progress monitoring probes instead. In fact, we couldn't get by without progress monitoring probes. Our most severe and intensive students should be progress monitored once a week to every 10 days. And our strategic or tier 2 learners should be progress monitored every 2 weeks to 1 month. And then the next one is a reading level assessment. That A to Z, the Fontes and Pinnell system, doesn't give us a lot of information regarding what it is a student we need to hone in as a teacher to know exactly what students need. We suggest looking at a diagnostic screener or survey instead. And then the next one is standard-based assessments. And even though our state summative assessment is a standard-based assessment, instead of using that to diagnose or to even determine how we should be teaching students to read, we reserve those for summative and later on as kids are moving along within their reading grade levels. And then we talked about diagnostic, but also a true diagnostic assessment. For there's very few 4 or 5 children who might need it. And then instead of doing an informal reading inventory, we believe in, again, outcome or summative assessments. Go ahead, Angie. So when we talk about practices to move away from, here's another one that's going to be kind of a shocker. And that is we go into many, many schools and we see when students are grouped together for small group that they're actually being grouped based on red, yellow, or green. And that's how often they come to the teacher table for small group. Yet we believe strongly that we call that the instructional level. We believe the instructional level only gives us a bird's eye view of how students are doing. And we rarely suggest grouping students based on that instructional level. We look at it first to see overall how we're doing, but not to differentiate our instruction. Okay, go ahead, Angie. So one of the things that we think is important in a structured literacy environment, and particularly if you're passionate about moving all students to grade level, is to ensure that we have protocols. The protocol that you see here is a benchmark protocol. And though, as I just stated, we don't group students based on their instructional level from their benchmark, we do believe that benchmark information is very critical to examine how we're doing overall as a school, as a grade level, as a teacher. And we also use benchmark data to see how all students are doing in total, to find out where we can use our resources and things like that. So each benchmark, beginning, middle, and end of the year in the book, It's Possible, is nuanced to bring out the questions that we should be asking at each of the steps along the way. As an example, at the beginning of the year, when we do our first benchmark, we want to make sure how all grade levels are doing, and do we need to change our resources? Here's an example. In kindergarten, typically you get what you get because we don't have the ability to level classrooms and make sure they're equally adjusted based on skills. Instead, you just get what walks through the door. So if you haven't examined that benchmark information, you might have one kindergarten teacher that has 15 students in red and intensive with intensive needs. And you might have another kindergarten teacher that only has 5 students in need. So at the beginning of the year, we analyze our benchmark data to see what teachers need help and where we might put our resources. Go ahead, Angie. So, benchmark assessments tell us broadly how students are doing. We can use them to analyze what groups of students are making gains and which are not. So, as another example, on our middle of the year benchmark protocol, we ask schools to write down, well, what what grade levels did make growth? Or more importantly, what teachers made growth? And were there particular classrooms where students went backwards? Because that teacher might need help, not as a gotcha, but maybe she's a new teacher and she doesn't know how a good way of teaching using decodables, which would show up in her nonsense word fluency test. So we use that to see, does someone need help, both the teacher or the student? So again, the questions are a little bit different on a benchmark protocol at the middle of the year than they are at the beginning of the year. We just talked about we can use our benchmark to determine what teachers are making gains and which ones are not. And we can also use them to inform whole group instruction. How many of our kids are getting there based on our universal instruction? If we're not moving the dial on green students getting more, then we need help in our universal instruction. But we cannot use benchmark assessments to inform our small group instruction. It just doesn't give us enough information. So we have developed, and these are found in the book, 8 guiding principles to use for progress monitoring data analysis. The first one is a big one. I'm not going to go through all of these, but look at this. We believe that meetings should take no longer than 45 minutes for a teacher, for a group of teachers, to sufficiently analyze their data. And we believe that every student can be examined during every progress monitoring or every data meeting. Holy cow, how do we look at every student during on their progress monitoring? Every single one. And you'll see we do in just a minute. Go ahead, Angie. So, as I've said, progress monitoring is really where the rubber hits the road as far as if you really want to move the dial when it comes to increasing literacy achievement for all students. Um, so the first thing is students need to be progress monitored on the skill in which there is a deficit. They also need to be taught on the skill that is the deficit. So in other words, if you have a student in 3rd grade or 2nd grade, and you're giving them an oral reading fluency, and now I'm thinking maybe to a cadence, but they really never mastered nonsense word fluency, we need to be looking at their nonsense word fluency data and making sure that we're giving instruction that aligns to that, but not as a singular skill, always in text. So in this case, we would want to make sure that in order to increase blending, which is what nonsense word indicates, that students are in decodable text a lot based on the skill that they're being directly taught. So as an example, if there is a deficit, and you can use your diagnostic screener to dig even deeper on this, let's suppose they have a deficit in nonsense word fluency, and you've done a diagnostic screener, and you know they have trouble with short A and short O, you're going to go back and directly teach that in small group instruction, and then have them practice with short A decodables. So always aligning our instruction, direct instruction for 2 or 3 minutes, and then reading, in this case, a decodable text. Oh, Thank you.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry.
So if a student has not mastered phoneme segmentation, then they need intervention in that area. We're not suggesting that they only receive an activity that's aligned with that, but rather activity, not activities, instruction that also gets them reading into text as quickly as possible. Go ahead, Angie. So we have another system. We have a very specific system, and this is how we can get it done in 45 minutes. This is what we call a dot card, and we're going to show you another way of doing this too. But we've created this because so many Acadians, Dibbles 8, Ames Web are so cumbersome in their ability to look at progress monitoring over time to make sure students are growing. So we've developed a system in which, if you look at this dot card, I'll just explain it. We're going to show you a spreadsheet that does the same thing. But this student is being progress monitored on phoneme segmentation. On the first dot card, on the first dot, which is red, she was well below, although that's the only time these dots have anything to do with the benchmark, the instructional level. So they started to progress monitor her, or this is him, Jason, sorry. On the next one, he didn't make much growth. So his dot is yellow. Again, it has nothing to do with the instructional level. It has to do with his growth. On the next progress monitoring, he did make growth. And so because he made growth, his dot is green. The next two progress monitors are red, still didn't make growth. So what happens is if you can imagine if you have a sea of cards on a wall, and I'm sure Angie's going to talk about this because Angie's obsessed with dot cards, I just have to tell you, then the administrator can quickly see what students are in trouble. And our data meetings should only be based on the students who are in trouble, maybe 5 or 6 kids. And if they're making gains, we're going to keep going. No need to discuss them and bring them up and find them in our Acadians or Dibbles 8 system. You can also see that in this card, the student has 2 blue dots. When a student has 2 blue dots, that means that student is on grade level, and we no longer need to progress monitor that student, and he would actually come out of the big card, the sentence strips. His card would be moved once he made grade level. Okay, Angie. Here we also have a progress monitoring spreadsheet. It does the same exact thing, works in the same way, but the cells automatically flip if a student makes grade level. So here you can see that at the middle of this, in the middle of this sheet, you can see 2 children that we're very worried about. Angie Morales is right in the center. She didn't start to make traction. In fact, she never made traction. I can't remember. This one is on oral reading fluency. And so she needed to be discussed at a data team meeting. And the other one is Jade Barlow. I know some of these names are going to sound familiar to some of you people because I've named them off after people in our schools. But Jade also is a struggler. So those are the only 2 students that we would talk about during our data process. And we would hone in right on them because everybody else is doing pretty well. Okay. I think that's actually the end. So that is the end of basically how we do data analysis. And I'm going to turn it over to Angie now. And I'll try to, Angie, while you're talking, I'll try to monitor the questions and see what we've got. But you
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Sounds great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about some of the components of the assessment and how we actually implemented these in the building. And then after a few minutes, I will be bringing in Jody Reese, our featured principal who's with us today, and hear what this work looks like in her building. So I want to go back to the key components of assessment. And Patty talked about benchmark assessments, and I just want to talk about how that work transformed, because how it was being done originally and then what it then changed into. And the first thing was we were doing it. We were doing benchmark assessments, 3 benchmarks a year. But the thing about it was we were not drilling down student by student. And we were doing this more out of compliance of like check. Yes, it was 3 benchmarks, but we weren't using it to guide and to really make decisions. So after each of the benchmarks, beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year, we immediately, the very next week, as soon as that was completed, the very next week, we brought in our teachers, grade level at a time, and we went through the benchmark assessments. In previous years, when I had been a teacher, before I was a principal, and I had done this as participated at these meetings as a teacher, we would be given the percentage of green, yellow, and red. We never went down to the student level. And so there was limited growth there because we weren't taking these student by student by student. So when we started working with Schools Cubed, we not only met immediately after the benchmarks, and we developed a plan, and we determined which students needed intervention. And we looked at every student who was not at the 50th percentile or higher, which students needed intervention, and based upon the benchmark assessment, what intervention would they receive? If we could not determine it, we would then look at a diagnostic screener to maybe see where they would be placed in the program that we were using. But more importantly than that, we set building goals on the benchmark assessments so that this benchmark, it was guiding our work as we went through our overall work. How are we doing as a building? We set building goals for middle of the year and end of the year. And then at our meetings, we would look at, are we on pace to hit that middle of year goal? Are we on pace between middle and end of the year? Are we on pace to hit that end of year goal? And so it was truly guiding our work. It was like this living, breathing part of what we were doing. And it literally directed everything that we did. And so then we also had each grade level had a goal. Each grade level, what percentage of students were at the 50th or higher? Where did we want them by the end of the year? And then from where they were at the beginning to where they were at the end, where would about halfway be? And we would set that as our middle of the year goal. And we set rigorous goals for ourselves. We had very high expectations for our students and ourselves. And then we met. But the thing about it is we were constantly discussing the data, because there is a statement, there's a sentence that has always stayed for me from the very first time I read the Wallace Foundation after Patty sent it to me. And a sentence in there says that highly effective leaders have instructional conversations. And so we were constantly talking about the data. Now, the other big change for us was progress monitoring. One was not everyone who needed to be progress monitored had been progress monitored in the past. It would be maybe students with an IEP, or maybe students in only the lowest of tiers. And often that was a lot of students, so they would kind of limit that. Well, we looked at anybody that wasn't at grade level, they were being progress monitored. And as Patty said, if they were close to benchmark, if they were close to where they needed to be, that would be monthly or every other week. But the students who were strategic, the tier 3 students who seriously we needed to look at, we progress monitored them weekly, and it was done consistently with fidelity. But it wasn't just done as, again, it had been done in the past. It was talked about, every single student. And so that leads me to dot cards. So I'm going to now advance to the dot cards. And Patty's right. I became obsessed with the dot cards. Now, as a leader, I want to point out this was the biggest change that we did in my time as leadership at Matthews Elementary. And it was by far the thing that I had probably, I would say, in looking back, the most pushback from. And in retrospect, I honestly believe it's because one, as a team, we did not understand the power that these cards would have. That was first and foremost. The other thing was, I don't think teachers and really just teachers in general, not just our school, I don't think that everyone understands exactly what progress monitoring tells us. Because once this work began, we never would have stopped doing it ever. It wasn't even questionable because the progress monitoring tells us if what we're doing is working. So our our groups, our intervention groups, and our small group instruction groups were, as Patty said, not set up on red, yellow, green. They were set up on skill gaps. And then the students received explicit, strategic, systematic instruction on exactly the skill gap. And then we were with as Patty taught me, a laser-like focus looking at that data every single solitary week and not just looking at it, having data conversations about it. So we had what we called dot card meetings where teachers came together every single week. They started out being about 45 minutes. We got it down to 30 to 35 minutes because we would come together. Teachers had already filled out the dot cards. We would bring those together. And the beauty of it was everybody in the school would talk about the students with the red dots. And we had a member of our team one time say, I love it because when we're talking about first grade, everyone in the room becomes a first grade teacher. We all begin to think about what does that student need? And those dots told us if what we were doing in intervention and if what we were doing at that differentiated small group instruction with that teacher at the teaching table, was it working? Was it working or was it not working? If it was working, we continued. But look at those red dots on the card. We had this happen all the time. Green dot, yellow dot, and then red dots. We knew we had a problem. In a conversation, we would come up with a plan. And the thing that leaders need to know that we need to point out is teachers do not leave these meetings without a plan. It's a plan, and the leader must be present because we're leading these conversations. And then the teachers have a plan for what they're going to do the very next week. And so then you can see after those conversations, look, a green dot. And that was the pattern. And then my favorite part about the dot wall or dot cards were they were our walls, and all the students who were not at grade level, they had the dot cards. But the beauty of the work is if you're doing it and you're looking at it every single week and you're having the discussion every single week, that's when progress happens. As Patty said earlier, this right here, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is when the data starts going. And this is when the students start making growth. And we were able to have celebrations and take those dot cards down. And we kept them. We kept the stack and we kept that stack in the data room. Look at the students who are no longer being progress monitored. Look at the impact that the teacher's instruction and that the interventions that the students are receiving, look at the impact it's having on the students. So we did talk about this on a weekly basis. And I will say, it became something then that was not only embraced, it became a non-negotiable in our building. There was a time when I became very sick. I had pneumonia. I was not able to be in the building, and it fell over. I missed 2 Fridays, actually. I didn't miss 2 full weeks, but I did miss 2 Fridays. And that's when we had our data team meetings. And the principal of the building now, who was on the building leadership team at the time, she's now principal in Matthews Elementary. She's on here today, actually. I saw her name earlier, Miss Christy Kennedy. And she called me, and I was sick. And she called me and told me about the growth. And I'm such a dork. I have goosebumps right now thinking about it. They had the meeting without me there, because it had become such a vital practice of, is what we're doing working? So the big changes were we met immediately after the data. We used that benchmark data to see how are we doing as a building? our program, our reading program, the resources we're using are we making progress as a collective building? But then every student that needs to be progress monitored, that was set up, it was set up strategically, whether it needed to be monthly, whether it needed to be weekly, but then the conversations happened. And my final thing is, it told me where I needed to be the very next week as a leader. And it told me the support that I needed to give to those teachers or the intervention teachers. And here is what it told me. Let's say, and you could stand at the doorway, and I would model this for visitors when they visited our building. I could stand at the doorway and say, let me tell you, see those 6 cards? That's where I need to be next week. And if you look, they're all in the same classroom. And they're the same skill level, and they're all working on the same skill. Look at the skill on that dot card. They're all working on the same thing. So do you know where I'm going to be? I'm going to be watching their small group instruction and giving feedback to the teacher and letting that teacher know it's not that they weren't doing the best they could. It's that, did they need extra support, or did they need extra guidance on what they needed to do? Did they need to change what they were saying out of their mouth to the students at the teaching table to get a higher impact and to get growth? Or we noticed a trend and we might have an intervention group all had red dots or yellow dots. So that told me then I was in the intervention room watching those students and seeing what they got. But the cards not only directed what the teachers did, and it just becomes a beautiful system. It's not guesswork. It truly is a system. And it becomes beautiful because it works. And it's this continuous cycle of growth for our students that constantly informs us. And I want this to stay with you today. Is what we're doing, is it working? So, and one change was we had always had a one size fits all. And that's why we weren't seeing the growth. But our intervention became based on skill. And our teacher groups, again, had been red, green, yellow, and those also became based on skill deficits, and students were based on skill gaps. And then we addressed it with strategic, explicit, systematic instruction. So at this point, I'm going to bring in Jody Reese, our principal, and I am going to stop sharing at this point, and I'm going to bring Jody in. Jody, if you, yeah, I can see
Good
she is
morning.
unmuted. Good morning,
Yep, good
Jody, and
morning.
welcome.
Thank you.
So we want to hear all about the amazing work and the amazing growth and the data that you're getting with your staff. So if you will, please tell all of our guests this morning about your role, where you are, your building, your staff, and just introduce yourself to everyone today.
Awesome, thank you. I think it's really hard to follow what Angie just said. She gave you the happy version of all the things. I'm gonna point out the muddy muck, drag you through the mud kind of version that I've been going through. But it's encouraging for me to hear Angie speak about what's on the other side of things at the end of the hard work. So like Angie said, my name is Jody Reese. I'm the principal at Sunset Elementary in Davis School District, which is in Farmington, Utah. And I have been in education for 25 years. The last 7 of those years have been as a building principal at Sunset Elementary. And my most recent 3 years has been working intensively with Patty and Schools Cubed, and trying to build those same systems in my school that Angie just talked about. Sunset Elementary is a Title I school. We have about 400 kids, and we have, excuse me, I currently have 15 gen ed teachers, a couple of sped teachers. We use SIPs at our school as our tier 3 reading intervention that helps build the reading progress for our kids. This year we are in a unique situation. A school just to the north of us closed, and so we inherited a whole new school of kids. And so that's brought in some behavioral and cultural community things that have impacted maybe a little bit some of the things that have been happening at our school. So we're probably going to see a natural dip in some of our data this year just because of those changes. It doesn't mean the good things aren't still happening. It's just part of change, right? So that's a
Yes.
little bit about
Yes.
us, Sunset
Thank you.
Elementary.
So you brought up SIPs, and I talked about dot cards. And so, if you will, Patty had said there's another way to track the progress monitoring data. Will you go through now and explain to us about SIPs and the SIPs tracker and how you use that to
Yeah.
monitor your progress in your building?
Absolutely. So, when my Schools Cube consultant Janelle Fuller reached or started talking to me about dot cards, I was like, what in the world are you talking about? And what do you want me to do? That
That's
is the most
exactly
crazy
how we
thing.
felt. Yeah.
That is the most crazy thing I've ever heard. I could not even picture it in my head. And so then she showed us the tracker, and Patty actually showed the progress monitoring tracker on the slides. And so that's what we're currently using with our teachers to track. It does the same thing the dot card does. It's just in an Excel file instead of on a dot card. We are still in the getting dirty with it, trying to sort it out, trying to convince teachers that it's the right thing to look at and how to use the data. But we're well on our way to using that successfully. Speaking of SIPs, SIPs is our tier 3, and I'm going to share my screen really quick.
Okay,
I
wonderful.
hope I can
I
indeed
hope
make
yours
this
goes better
work.
than mine did.
Okay, so we use SIPs as our tier 3 intervention. And so these are generally for our kids that score a composite score in the red or yellow if you're using Dibble's Acadians. And this is a tracker that we used. The orange box on the side of it, I've just covered up the names of our kids for their privacy. Oh, this is not the right one. Hold on.
Okay.
This is my version of the dot cards. Sorry. I need this one. Did it switch?
It did.
Yep.
Yes, you're good,
Okay.
Jody.
Okay. So this is our, again, the blue box, just, I don't want you stealing my good tutors, so I didn't put their names up on the screen.
Okay.
But this takes us through, these kids are grouped, and so you can see in column G, it gives the level of the lesson where the kids are. And then after every 5 lessons, they have a mastery test. And so these kids get a score on phonics and sight words, basically telling us, is the instruction in SIPs working for these kids? Are they mastering the skills that SIPs is teaching them? So anytime there's a green on the screen, and I'll kind of slide over so you can see, but anytime there's a green, kids are mastering. Anytime there's a red, they haven't quite hit that mastery level yet. So what we do when we look at this is we will now go in and look at those individual kids, compare it with their progress monitoring data, and say, are we seeing that same trend? Are the greens growing in their progress monitoring? And typically what we find is, yes, that's true. And our reds are kind of stagnant. And then we start having conversations about how is SIPs being implemented? Is it being implemented with fidelity? Are they going fast enough so they get through the lesson and the kids get enough reading time? Are teachers supporting the SIPs work back in the classroom so those kids are getting double doses of those skills? And recently we've even had conversations about, is this SIPs tutor, the paraprofessional that's teaching SIPs, are they the right one to be teaching this group of kids? Or do we need to make a switch in the people giving the lessons so that it's more impactful for those kids? So this is just another level of data that we use to track our tier 3 intervention, and compare that with the growth that we're seeing or not seeing according to Acadians data.
Thank you for sharing that. In
You're
in
very
our
welcome.
in our prior conversation, in planning for this, you talked about one of the levers for change was truly the instructional conversations that you have with your teachers and your staff. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
Patty, the book really goes into that it's the leader. It's the leader who needs to be having these conversations and doing this work and truly leading it. So can you talk to us about how you've done that and the impact it's had in your building?
Yes, it has been the hardest 3 years of my career. But the most, and Patty laughs because she knows we've had
Yep.
conversations about it. But by far the most impactful 3 years of my educational career, especially as an instructional leader. I would tell anybody who will listen to me that my work with Schools Cubed has been the most impactful work that I have done as an instructional leader. And I love that Patty's taken that work and putting it in a book so more people get to learn
Yeah.
from the knowledge that she has with the Schools Cubed company. I've worked with my Schools Cubed consultant, and she has pushed me immensely. Just the things that I've learned. Patty shared a slide at the beginning of her presentation that talked about a principal in the 25th percentile versus a principal at the 75th percentile. I think when I started this journey, I thought I was a good instructional leader. I was not seasoned as a principal, but I felt like I had good knowledge to grow my teachers and make things happen. And then I started in my Schools Cubed, and I learned really quick I was in that 25th percentile. But now I'm proud to say I'm more up into 75 because of the knowledge that I've gained, that I can speak more fluently to literacy, science of reading. I've been letters trained with my teachers. The conversations around data and progress monitoring. When we first started this, I was the red, yellow, green principal. They're red. We got to fix it. But now I can dial down and I can talk about first sound fluency, correct letter sounds, all the sub skills that we need to be looking at. And one of the things that we try to do with our teachers is 3 times a year we have deep data dives with them after benchmark because it's so important. And we spend between a half and a full day with our teachers on every grade level to just dive deep, answer their questions, help them understand the data, plan for tier 1 instruction if changes need to be made, plan for tier 2 instruction and help them build the systems around tier 2. And then about every 6 weeks after that, so partway in between those benchmarks, we have a shorter, about 45 minutes is what we have, progress monitoring data dive with them where we look at how are they doing, what kids do we need to focus on, who can we move, who are we not moving, why, what's working, what's not, and then continue to revamp our plans for that small group intervention time. So those are some of the conversations we have, and it's not me alone. I have an amazing instructional coach who is far wiser than me, and I'm glad I get to learn from her every day. And she's actually on the call today, and I love that I get to work with her because I couldn't do this by myself, but I know and understand that it is my work to do to lead. I have to lead. I can get a team around me to support me, but it's absolutely my work to lead. And when my teachers see me being able to eloquently talk, sometimes, about literacy and the things we need to do, it really truly makes a difference. Because then they know what I'm talking about, and then I'm going to hold them to it.
Absolutely. So this is often though a big learning curve for an administrator. And that was one of the things that you and I talked about in the prior conversation too. It's a big learning curve for the for the staff as well, but for the administrator leading the work. Can you expand on that and how you felt? Because I think it's powerful for other leaders to hear that it is a learning curve.
Yeah, it definitely is. So I remember it was about this time 3 years ago, I got a phone call from our then director of teaching and learning, who now happens to be a consultant with Patty. Patty steals all of our people.
Yeah.
But she called me and she says, hey, I have this opportunity to work with Schools Cube. She gave me the 30-second version of it, and I started to cry right on the phone because I knew that this is exactly what our kids needed, because we had struggling readers and we were okay with 40% of our kids being proficient. And that was just gut-wrenching to me. And so I didn't even know what I was saying yes to, but I said yes. And there were days that I was like, forget it, this is not worth it. But truly, it has been the most impactful work. It is a huge learning curve because administrators typically don't have a literacy background. Some might, if they kind of came up with literacy as they, progress through their career. I did not. I was a balanced literacy teacher in upper grade, so I had no idea what phonics was or phonemic awareness. I just gave kids a book and said, here you go, do your best. And so I had a lot to learn. I had to learn the things that that younger grade teachers just knew because they worked with phonics, they worked with phonemic awareness, they worked with sight words. I didn't know those things. And so um, there were days that I was just defeated, completely defeated, thinking, I can't do this. This is too hard. I know it's the right work, but it is killing me. I just don't have the capacity to do this. But I will tell anybody again that wants to listen, you do have the capacity to do this. You have to give yourself grace because it's hard, but it is the right work. And it's the right work that administrators need to be involved in.
Yes.
Get yourself a team that's going to continue to support you and grow you. I'm grateful for, Patty and Janelle and Schools Cubed, and for my literacy coach, and for my district and the way that they support us with this work. But it is hard and it's messy and you're going to hate life. But when you start to see teachers get it,
Mhm.
and you start to see the progress that the kids make, it makes it all worth it. And I do it 1,000 times over.
Yes, I
Thank you,
totally
Jody.
agree. Thanks for sharing that.
You're
And,
very welcome.
and it's important to point out too that I had been an instructional coach, so I've had some of the literacy background, and and had done consulting work, but the part that my learning curve was, I didn't know the systems and structures piece. I
Yeah.
did not know the systems piece. And when I was setting that up, it was all completely brand new. And I was the same way, like, can I do this? I mean, it
Yeah.
is that learning curve, but it is so important to just get in there and, as you said, start the work. And then
Yeah.
the teachers see that you're learning right along with them. And it is about building that team, and then the team collectively grows together as you do the work. Because I think I saw it's hard to talk, listen, and watch the chat box, but I think I saw someone point out that, I had principal training. I had some state principal training as first year principal. I had also had a master's and a specialist degree, and never had I heard about systems and structures, and never had I heard about
Yeah.
being an instructional leader.
Yeah.
So thank you for expressing how important it is for the principals to lead the work. And you did a beautiful job of really describing what that work looks like. And kudos to you and your staff for embracing it.
Thank you.
I always say too, hardest work I've ever done, but by far the most rewarding. At
Yeah.
this point, I'm going to
Can I
bring
can I
Patty
say one
in.
more thing? Can I
Of
say one more
course,
thing that just came to
absolutely.
my mind while you were talking?
Yes.
I know that there are some administrators on the call, but I know there's some instructional leaders on or instructional coaches on the call. I just want to speak to my instructional coach for a second. She pushes me. This last round of data meetings that we had with our teachers, she very easily could have taken it and done an eloquent job of it, because that's her scope of her work.
Mm-hmm.
She made me do it. She made me run it as the instructional leader. And I'm grateful for that. At first, I was like, oh no, I'm not ready for that. She made me do it. And I am far better because of that, because now I know what I'm speaking to. So if you are an instructional coach, push your principals, push them to do this work, guide them, teach them, help them, but push them to do this work because they need to be doing it.
Oh, so well said. I got goosebumps from that. Patty?
Well, yes, I want to jump in and take off from what Judy said right there, because here's why we can't just turn this over to the instructional coach folks. Number one, it's the principal who's the evaluator, not the instructional coach. And it's the principal who needs to establish a culture of all means all. So that's up to the principal. That's not up to the coach. It's the principal who needs to put into place the systems that are going on in the schools, not the coach. And I was in Utah, and some of the people who I spoke to all day are on this call. And I just want to say, I want you to imagine this, that if we really want to get 100% of kids reading at grade level, which I will tell you, I know is possible. That's why the book is called It's Possible. We can't do it if only 50% of the teachers know how to do it. And when we're talking about instructional coaching, it's as it should be voluntary. Please help me with this. That's exactly what it needs to be. But we have found that about 50% of the teachers don't ask for help. So then who is that incumbent upon? The principal must lead those teachers as well. So the work that we see happening in schools where we move the most students is because the principal is leading the work. Sorry, I just had to add that.
Oh, don't be sorry. No, I'm amening. Yeah, I had goosebumps as you were saying it. So true. Patty, did you happen to see any questions in the chat box that you
Yes.
would like to address?
Yes, there is
Okay.
one. Jody talked about Jody talked about triple dosing, and she's right. Principals or tier 3 students should be triple dosed. And here's how she does it. All kids get core literacy instruction, and then her tier 3 students, in addition, receive SIPs for their intervention. If you are familiar with SIPs, there is a reading component attached to SIPs that aligns with their what their instruction is in SIPs. So it's a book. And so we do a baggie system. The book goes into the baggie. And then when they're in small group, the teacher is working on those same skills that the student had in SIPs in their small group instruction. So that gives students an opportunity to get it 3 times. So, and then they get it for intervention as well. So that is how we triple dose our most severe in need students. And then somebody also asked me about tier 2. We strongly believe that students who are in tier 2, their instruction should be aligned to whole group instruction. So it might be, often we see the students in tier 2 as fluency students who need more work with fluency. So rereading of the passage, dyad reading. It could be a reread of their social studies book. It doesn't have to be their core reading program, but something that they are seeing in their regular classroom instruction. So that's how we get tier 2 in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just read one comment. I always jump at the opportunity if I ever get it to quote the incredible, knowledgeable Dr. Jan Hasbrook, but she wrote something in here that I hearted in the chat box. Principals should inspire the desire to reach those literacy goals. And that is so true. And it's that building leader who's driving that work and saying, we can do this. Like when Jody said, you've got your doubts, but you're still telling the team, we can do this. We can do this. And it is so powerful when they actually start reaching those literacy goals. But we set the tone for that to inspire the teachers to get there.
Angie, I'd like to add a little bit on to what Jan said, because she's right. And there's actually research that goes along with that. And principals, highly effective principals, inspire with data. They don't hide the data. They make it very upfront and say, okay, you guys, right now we're at 45% proficient. By the end of the year, we're going to be 64% proficient. Angie talked about her goals, and she's right. I mean, I've been on it with Angie many times where they made their end of year goal by the middle of the year goal, and they would have to adjust it. Another thing that we do with goals that people sometimes forget about is we make sure that our schools have a goal for those lowest achieving students, so that we always are saying, how many are we going to get out of tier 3 every single year? We look at those tier 3 goals too.
So at this time, it's time to wrap it up. So I'll ask anybody if anyone has a closing thought, and then we'll go to Donna to see who our prize winner is today for our giveaway book. Jody, is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, just thank you. And you guys are doing the right work. Literacy matters.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you for the work you're doing, you and your amazing team.
That's right.
I would just like to thank everyone for being here. I will say this because Patty Montgomery won't say this. So I'll say this, but she kind of has a little harder time saying it. The beauty of Schools Cubed is that when you do the work, the growth happens. It just does. It happens. I feel personally, because I've lived it, it is the answer to transform and turn every school around in our country. The beauty, though, is now that it is in book format and it's not just a sales pitch. I honestly believe this because, Schools Cubed consultants couldn't get into every single school in our country, but we now can have the book on the desk in the office with a leader in every school. And so that then they can actually learn what this work looks like. It's there. There are resources in there. So sorry for that sales pitch, but Patty
Thank
doesn't
you,
always
Angie.
do that. And I just wanted to say that. So Patty, do you have
Thank
anything
you.
to say before we turn it to
No,
Donna?
no, that was lovely. Thank you. I'd like
Well,
Donna
you're
to end.
welcome. You're welcome. Donna?
All right, everyone. That was so informative. I mean, really, you can watch this webinar and read the book and get your school started if you are so motivated to do so. So our winner today is going to be Christina Samuelson from Texas. She was our first arrival on the scene this morning, so I think she deserves this book. Congratulations, Christina. Please put your name, your address in the chat, and we will send that book to you along with a bonus dot card.
Dot card. And you know what, Donna, someone asked me and I forgot to, or someone put a question in the chat, and it was, how big are the dot cards? You can do them on either a 3x5 card, which I think Angie did, or a 4x6. And so I will attach that to the recording so that you can make your own dot cards.
Beautiful. And I know when I was at Angie's school, they had that I think in the teacher's lounge, I think.
The data room. It was in the data room.
Oh, the
Yeah.
data room. So
Yeah.
it's where no parents are
Kids.
in there,
Mhm.
and you can also put, some sort of shade or something over it if you want to keep it very, very private. Just a little tip there. Okay, my friends, I love this work. It just gives me chills, and thank you all for being here, and we'll see you
Thank you.
next week.
Yes.
All right.
On
Thank you.
collaboration. Thank you.
Hey,
Very
Patty
good.
and Angie,
Bye.
there was a
Yes.
there was
Go
a
ahead,
question
Jody.
there was a question in the chat about a certificate of attendance.